Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 716, and today is November 22nd, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We, of course, have some major news to get through today with the Western escalations in their proxy war in Ukraine and what that could mean, and of course Netanyahu's indictment at the ICC. So be sure to share today's show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. It's reposted on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you could listen to audio podcasts, and of course follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_. Now throughout this week I've been teasing a huge announcement that I have coming, and I could let you all know what that is today. I am in the process of launching a brand new show, the Kyle Anzalone Show, which is going to be a far better produced, video show than this currently is. Now, conflicts of interest is still going to exist. Initially, at least the Kyle Anzalone Show, we're going to try to run 1 to 2 days a week, and with the rest of the week, the schedule being filled out by conflicts of interest. So soon I will be posting links of where you could follow the Kyle Anzalone Show, subscribe to the Kyle Anzalone Show, so you get to see every episode, including the first, which I did record yesterday and is now just being cleaned up in production. I am really excited. What I saw early on came out absolutely fantastic. I think you all are going to be a big fan of the Kyle Anzalone Show, and you're going to see that it's really a step in the right direction, that, the product and the content that I'm producing is getting just better and better. So very excited about the Kyle Anzalone Show and everything I have going on with that. Again, more information to come, including the first episode out either later today or sometime this weekend. All right, everybody, let's get in the news for today's show. First story up here. Putin says Russia struck Ukraine with a new hypersonic missile in response to Western missiles. So Russian President Vladimir Putin said Thursday that Russia fired a new hypersonic missile at a Ukrainian missile factory in Dnipro in the response to the U.S. and British long-range missile strikes being fired into Russian territory. So Putin said, according to the Russian media outlet TASS, there was, among other things, a combat condition test of one of Russia's newest intermediate-range missile systems. In this case, it was a ballistic missile in a non-nuclear hypersonic version. The missile, codenamed Orshnik, would have been banned under the Intermediate Range Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, which the U.S. withdrew from under Trump in 2019. So Putin said, "We believe the United States made a mistake by unilaterally destroying the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 2019 under a far-fetched pretext." Ukrainian officials claimed Russia fired an intercontinental ballistic missile into Dnipro, but that was quickly contradicted by U.S. and other Western officials. The Pentagon later said it was a new missile based on Russia's Zubeth IBCM model, and that Russia notified the U.S. before the launch, which was also confirmed by the Kremlin. Russia's use of its new missile came after Ukraine launched ATACMS and British Storm Shadow missiles into Russian territory. The escalation came after President Biden authorized Ukraine to use longer-range missiles, which require direct NATO support, to be fired. Biden took the step despite clear warnings from Russia that the escalation would risk nuclear war and World War III. Putin said that the ATACMS attack did not result in any serious damage, but the Storm Shadow hit a military command post, resulting in deaths and injuries. He warned the NATO-supported strikes could turn Ukraine into a global conflict. Putin said, "We consider ourselves entitled to use our weapons against the military facilities of those countries that allowed their weapons to be used against our facilities. If anyone doubts this, they are wrong. There will always be a response." In response to Biden authorizing long-range strikes on Russian territory, Putin formally changed Russia's nuclear doctrine, which now considers an attack by a non-nuclear armed state that's supported by a nuclear armed power as a joint attack. That doctrine allows for the use of nuclear weapons in response to a conventional attack against Russia or Belarus if it's deemed a critical threat to Russia's sovereignty. So next up here, we also have Russia saying that a U.S. missile defense base in Poland is a potential target. This again, Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com, November 21st. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said Thursday that a controversial U.S. missile defense base in Poland is a potential target of the Russian military. Comments that came amid soaring tensions as the U.S. just authorized Ukraine to strike Russian territory with the long-range NATO missiles. So Zakharova explained, given the level of threats posed by such Western military facilities, the missile defense base in Poland has long been included among the priority targets for a potential neutralization. It is necessary this can be achieved using a wide range of advanced weaponry. The Aegis Ashore anti-ballistic missile system in Poland has long been a security concern for Russia, as its MARK or Mk-41 launchers are capable of fitting nuclear-capable Tomahawk cruise missiles, which have a range of about 1,000 miles. A land-based version of the Tomahawks was previously banned by the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the same INF treaty we are just talking about, which the U.S. withdrew from in 2019. The U.S. recently opened the Aegis Ashore base in Poland, and NATO formally took control of it on Thursday. So this is from U.S. Air Force General James, the head of NATO's Air Command, said at the ceremony formalizing NATO control over the base. The integration of the Aegis Ashore system into NATO's defensive network underscores our collective commitment to ensuring the security of its allies. Zakharova said the establishment of the base follows a series of deeply destabilizing actions by the Americans and their North Atlantic allies in the strategic sphere, and the move aligns with the long-standing and destructive practice of advancing NATO's military infrastructure closer to Russia's borders. Her warnings that Russia could potentially target the base come after Russia updated its nuclear doctrine in response to the U.S. supporting long-range Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory. Under the new doctrine, Russia considers an attack by a non-nuclear armed state that's supported by nuclear armed power as a joint attack. Russian President Vladimir Putin also said on Thursday that Russia has the right to target military facilities of countries that are supplying Ukraine with the missiles. He said, "We believe we have the right to use our weapons against military facilities of those countries that allow their weapons to be used against our facilities." Now, last here on the kind of missile provocations going on in Europe, we do have this report: Ukraine fires British Storm Shadow missiles into Russia. Ukraine fired at least 10 British Storm Shadow missiles into Russia's Kursk Oblast, the Wall Street Journal and several other media outlets reported on Wednesday. Ukraine has used the Storm Shadows, which have a range of about 155 miles, in strikes on Crimea, but Wednesday's attack, which targeted the Kursk Oblast, marks the first time Ukrainian forces have used them into the Russian mainland, another major escalation of the proxy war. The US and UK have reportedly authorized the Ukraine's use of the Storm Shadows in strikes on Russian territory after President Joe Biden gave the green light for Ukraine to use the US-made ATACMS missiles. Ukraine launched ATACMS into Russia for the first time on Tuesday, so this happened the day after. Both the Storm Shadows and the ATACMS require Western intelligence for Ukraine to fire them, meaning the US and NATO are now directly supporting long-range strikes on Russian territory. Earlier this year, a German military leak revealed British soldiers are on the ground in Ukraine, helping Ukrainian forces fire the Storm Shadow missiles. Moscow has already made clear that the NATO-supported long-range strikes inside Russia risks a nuclear war. On Tuesday, in response to Biden authorizing the ATACMS strikes, Russian President Vladimir Putin formally updated Russia's nuclear doctrine, which now considers an attack by a non-nuclear armed state that's supported by a nuclear armed power as a joint attack. The U.S. said on Wednesday that it was closing down its embassy in Ukraine, citing specific information of a potential significant air attack, signaling Washington is expecting Russia to escalate in response to long-range strikes. Several other countries, including Italy and Greece, followed the U.S. lead in shuttering their embassies. And so this is one point I want to make here that the White House doesn't seem to understand, but is very important. Every time they escalate their support for Ukraine, so the Abrams tanks, the HIMARS, the ATACMS, the cluster munitions, the F-16s, the Patriots, all these different longer range, more advanced military systems that we've given Ukraine over the past 3 years are creating reactions from Russia. And so there was a recent interview with Jade Sullivan. We talked about that previously on the show, where he said that, look, we give them tanks, we give them the F-16s, and it doesn't correlate to a victory or success or productivity on the battlefield. Now, this is happening because when we give Ukraine F-16s, Russia carries out more strikes on more civilian or other targets in Ukraine. They step up their attacks. They are realize they have to take more Ukrainian territory. And so I think that's a big part of what's going on here. Isn't that these attacks necessarily don't hurt Russia's military capability. I'm sure for some extent they do. That when we authorize these attacks and they take out a Russian arms depot or something like that, that certainly does have some even marginal impact on the battlefield. But if it causes Russia to intensify their attacks, to carry out these strikes using new weapons and things like that on Ukraine, well then it's not going to be beneficial for Ukraine to have received the weapons, because Russia, has the ability to significantly ramp up their war even more. They have far more missiles, they have far more advanced weapons that they could be deploying here. And so the more advanced weapons we give Ukraine, the more widely we allow them to be used, the more Russia falls with reciprocal measures. And again, as Biden's national security advisor has said, that those weapons transfers are not leading to the success that they want to see, because Russia is ramping up their attacks in response. All right, next up here, U.S. to give Ukraine widely banned anti-personnel mines, breaking its own policy. So this is from Dave DeCamp, November 22nd, antiwar.com. The Biden administration announced on Wednesday that it will be providing Ukraine with widely banned anti-personnel mines, breaking its own policy that's meant to prohibit the transfer of the indiscriminate weapon. The provision of the anti-personnel mines is the latest escalation from the Biden administration. It comes after President Biden authorized Ukraine to launch long-range strikes on Russian territory using U.S. missiles, which Ukrainian forces have already begun firing. Anti-personnel mines, which are designed to maim and kill people, are banned in 164 countries under the Ottawa Treaty, but the U.S. and Russia are not signatories. Ukraine has signed the treaty but is violating it by using anti-personnel mines in the conflict. U.S. officials are justifying supplying Ukraine with the anti-personnel mines by pointing to Russia's use of them and by saying that individual Russian ground troops are leading the offensive in eastern Ukraine, not armored vehicles. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin also pointed to the fact that Ukraine already makes its own anti-personnel mines and claims the U.S. version is safer since they could self-detonate. To provide the mines to Ukraine, President Biden has to violate his own policy that he implemented in 2022, which banned the transfer and the use of anti-personnel mines outside of the Korean Peninsula. The ban was initially an Obama-era policy, but was reversed by the Trump administration in 2020. Arms control groups, including the Campaign to Ban Landmines, slammed the provision of the U.S. mines to Ukraine. Quote, the U.S. must respect its own policy prohibiting landmine transfers as one of the world's largest donor to mine clearance, spending millions annually to prevent civilians. It's inconceivable that the U.S. would facilitate laying new mines. And one of the reasons I would suspect the U.S. is doing this is because they know that Ukraine is never going to retake the territory they mine. And so they see this as being a Russian problem, and it will take Russian lives, and it will cause, Russia to spend billions of dollars to clean up all these American mines that are going to litter what was once Ukrainian territory, which will become Russian territory. Same thing. I think there was probably a similar calculation to giving the Ukrainians the cluster munitions as well. All right, next up here, Biden administration moves to forgive $4.7 billion in loans to Ukraine. Wish I could get in on some of those giveaways. The State Department announced on Wednesday that it has moved to forgive about $4.7 billion in U.S. loans to Ukraine, as the Biden administration is trying to spend as much as it can on Ukraine during the transition period. The $61 billion in aid for Ukraine was authorized by Congress earlier this year, and it included about $9.4 billion in economic and budgetary aid in the form of loans, an idea that was first promoted by President-elect Donald Trump. However, the law allows the president to forgive the loans if Congress doesn't need to stop them. And there's a really important story here that it's worth stopping and just mentioning. And that is, remember, there was a real stalemate, gridlock in Congress over this $95 billion worth of foreign military aid that they wanted to send. Some of it was going to go to Taiwan and the Asia Pacific, a larger chunk going to Israel, and of course the largest chunk going to Ukraine. And Republicans were standing against this, and there were, some Republicans like Senator J.D. Vance, who was elected in part, against this war. And so there was significant opposition, but ultimately that deadlock was broken by Donald Trump when he told the Republicans that it was okay to vote for it. And the reason Trump said it was okay to vote for it is that part of the plan had been converted to his, which was turning part of the money that we give to Ukraine into loans. Now, it was obvious at the time that Ukraine would never be able to repay it. It's just a little bit shocking how quickly these loans are being forgiven. So after November 15th, President Biden was allowed to forgive the first half of the loan. So this is what State Department spokesman Matt Miller said. We have taken that step that was outlined in the law to cancel those loans. On January 1st, 2026, Trump will be able to forgive the second half of the loan if he chooses to do it and Congress allows it. Senator Rand Paul attempted to block Biden from forgiveness of the $4.7 billion by introducing a resolution, but the effort failed on a vote of 37-61. Today, U.S. Senator Rand Paul will force a vote in the U.S. Senate on a joint resolution in disapproval to stop the Biden administration from making Ukraine's debt the responsibility of the American people. The Biden administration's proposed shift of the burden of funding from Ukraine's small businesses, farmers, and corrupt bureaucrats onto the backs of hardworking Americans who are already suffering during a time of high inflation. Paul said that any senators who vote against the resolution will be sending a message to all Americans that they clearly prioritize Ukraine over the people they represent and are putting America last. And I think, that feeling among Americans probably contributed to why Trump won the election and Kamala Harris lost. Next up here, we are moving over to the Middle East, where the ICC has issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. So the International Criminal Court on Thursday formally issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for their role in the genocide in Gaza. The ICC said it was issuing the arrest warrants for crimes against humanity and crimes committed by Israel since October 8, 2023, and up to at least May 20th, 2024. The court said it found reasonable grounds to believe Netanyahu and Gallant, quote, each bear responsibility for following crimes as co-perpetrators for committing the acts jointly with others, the war crimes of starvation and the method of warfare, and the crimes against humanity of murder, prosecution, and other inhumane acts. The ICC said the two Israeli leaders also bear criminal responsibility as civilian superiors for the war crimes intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population. The court said that Netanyahu and Gallant intentionally and knowingly deprived the civilian population in Gaza of objects indispensable to their survival, including food, water, medicine, and medical supplies, as well as fuel and electricity. The ICC also announced it was issuing an arrest warrant for Mohammed Diab, and this are also known as Mohammed Daif, and Israel claimed to have killed Daif in a strike on a tent camp that killed 90 Palestinians, but Hamas says he's still alive, so it's unclear if he's even alive. Now, initially, when the ICC chief prosecutor Karim Khan sought the arrest warrants for Daif, Netanyahu, and Gallant 6 months ago, of course, Gallant was still the Israeli defense minister. He was fired by Netanyahu earlier this month, and There was also Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar and Ismail Haniyeh, and they have both been killed by Israel, confirmed since. So the charges against Taif and then the charges that would have been brought against Sinwar and Haniyeh were related to the conduct of Hamas fighters in Israel during the October 7th attack, including the taking of hostages and the treatment of hostages. Notably, the court did not allege any sexual violence occurred during the October 7th attack, despite claims of mass rape from the U.S. and Israeli media. The court does say there's evidence of sexual violence and rape was committed against Israeli hostages in Gaza. The ICC said it found reasonable grounds to believe Taif was responsible for the crimes against humanity of murder, extermination, torture, and rape from other forms of sexual violence, as well as war crimes of murder, cruel treatment, torture, taking of hostages, outrages upon personal dignity, and the rape and other forms of sexual violence. The warrants mean that Netanyahu, Gallant, and DF could be subject to arrest in more than 120 countries and are a party to the ICC. While the ICC went after both Israel and Hamas leadership, Netanyahu accused the court of taking an anti-Semitic decision. The U.S. also rejected the warrants since U.S. officials are implicated due to all the support and military aid that the U.S. has provided to Israel to help it carry out its war crimes and crimes against humanity. So this is from White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby. The United States fundamentally rejects the court's decision to issue arrest warrants for senior Israeli officials. We remain deeply concerned by the prosecutor's rush to seek arrest warrants and the troubling process errors that led to this decision. So the U.S. have been putting up significant pressure on the court to abandon the warrants against Israeli officials, but the campaign didn't work. Congress may now advance bills to sanction the ICC. I'm guessing that we're going to see that in coming days. In response to the warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant, Senator Tom Cotton reminded the ICC that the U.S. has a law on the books that authorizes the U.S. to use force, military force, and invasion of the Hague-based court to free any U.S. or allied government officials or service members, and that is nicknamed the Hague Invasion Act. And so Cotton wrote on X, the ICC is a kangaroo court and Karim Khan is a deranged frantic. Woe to him and to anyone who tries to enforce these outlaw warrants. Let me give them a friendly reminder. The American law on the ICC, known as the Hague Invasion Act, for that reason. Think about it. Later that day, President Biden released a statement slamming the ICC. It said the ICC's issuance of arrest warrants against Israeli leaders is outrageous. Let me be clear once again. Whatever the ICC might imply, there's no equivalence, none between Israel and Hamas. We always stand with Israel against threats to security. And for Biden, of course, this is just a sign that his presidency will be remembered as a supporter of a war criminal and a genocide. All right, this year, U.S. vetoes Gaza ceasefire resolution at UN Security Council. On Wednesday, the U.S. used its veto power on the United Nations Security Council to kill a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, a vote that came as Israel is carrying out an ethnic cleansing campaign in northern Gaza, and aid levels in the Strip are at their lowest level yet. The resolution failed in a vote of 14-1 as every other member of the 15-member UN Security Council, including the UK, supported the call for a ceasefire. The 5 permanent members, the US, UK, France, Russia, and China, all have veto power. The resolution demanded an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire to be respected by all parties, and further reiterates a demand for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Even though the resolution called for an unconditional release of Israeli hostages in Gaza, the U.S. justified its veto by saying it didn't make hostage release a condition for the ceasefire. So Robert Wood, the deputy U.S. ambassador to the UN, said, "We made clear throughout negotiations we could not support unconditional ceasefire that failed to release the hostages." The vote marked the 4th time the UN Security Council resolution calling for an end to the U.S. combat Israeli genocidal war in Gaza, and that the U.S. vetoed that vote. The ambassador from Algeria, a non-permanent member of the council, slammed the UN for the vote. The ambassador said, "Today's message is clear to the Israeli occupying power. First, you may continue your genocide. You may continue your collective punishment of the Palestinian people with complete impunity. It is this chamber you enjoyed immunity." So the vote came just a few days after the U.S. criticized Russia for vetoing a UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in Sudan. Then, the current, but U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield said then, "It is shocking that Russia vetoed an effort to save lives, though perhaps it shouldn't be." And so just, funny how the double standard works there. All right, next up here, White House says Dem senators aid Hamas by voting against arms for Israel. So this was an article from the Huffington Post, and I got some of the quotes here that I thought were important. So they write, "The Biden administration is aggressively pushing senators to bless continued U.S. weapons shipments for Israel ahead of a first-of-its-kind vote in Congress on the policy," the Huffington Post has learned, and administration officials are suggesting lawmakers who voted against the arms are empowering American and Israeli foes from Iran to the militant groups of Hamas and Hezbollah, which the U.S. treats as terror organizations. HuffPost obtained a copy of the talking points the administration is circulating on Capitol Hill ahead of Wednesday's vote on several tranches of military equipment that President Biden wants to send to Israel. The White House sent documents to multiple Democratic Senate offices on Tuesday. Two Senate aides who requested anonymity to speak to told the Huffington Post. So the document from the Biden administration reads, "The effort is serious enough that the White House has launched a pointed pushback. Disapproving arms purchases for Israel at this moment would put wind in the sails of Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas at the worst possible moment," the document says. The document additionally appeared to endorse continued fighting despite the administration's public narrative that is seeking a settlement and an end to the deadly Israeli military campaigns in Gaza and Lebanon. So the document says, "Now is the time to focus on pressure on Hamas to release the hostages and stop the war." Adding, "Cutting off arms from Israel would put this goal even further out of reach and prolong the war, not shorten it." The document also echoes a frequent talking point deployed by Israeli defenders to deflect attention from its conduct. Hamas can stop the war tomorrow by simply releasing the hostages, starting with older men, including an elderly American citizen, and women, and young and old. In Lebanon, the document adds, "A prospective truce is only possible because the military pressure Hezbollah is under. Those resolutions are particularly ultimately and counterproductive as we are working to secure a ceasefire in Lebanon." So this is just absolutely absurd. And let's talk about this vote that the White House is so strongly against. So this is from Day DeCamp. Senate votes down Bernie Sanders' effort to block weapons deals for Israel. So the Senate on Wednesday night voted down resolutions introduced by Bernie Sanders to block several weapons transfers to Israel, but the effort received more support from Democrats than expected. So 18 senators, including Senators Sanders, Angus King, and 16 Democrats, voted in favor of the first resolution that would have blocked the transfer of 120 millimeter tank shells to Israel. 79 senators voted against the resolution, including Senator Rand Paul, who opposes U.S. military aid to Ukraine and previously joined efforts to stop weapons transfers to Saudi Arabia that supported its brutal war in Yemen. A second resolution to block 120-meter mortar rounds for Israel failed in a vote of 19-78. The third resolution, which would have blocked JDAM bomb kits to Israel, failed in a vote of 17-80. The White House came out strongly against the resolution ahead of the vote, putting out talking points that claimed any senator who voted to block the arms shipment to Israel would be helping Hamas. A day earlier, Sanders and his co-sponsors that include Peter Welch, Jeff Malarkey, and Chris Van Hollen gave a press conference where they explained their reasoning for wanting to block the arms transfers, pointing to the starvation of the Palestinians and the atrocities being carried out by U.S. weapons. Sanders said U.S. military aid to Israel was illegal due to foreign assistance laws that prohibit the blocking of weapons to countries that intentionally block aid or commit human rights violations. Sanders said Israel is clearly in violation of these laws. Under these circumstances, it is illegal for the U.S. government to provide them with more offensive weaponry. Joint resolutions of disapproval are Congress's tools to enforce those laws. And then we are wrapping up the show today with this story here on a potential ceasefire in Lebanon. Israel reiterates it wants freedom to act in southern Lebanon as a part of a truce deal. So on Wednesday, Israel's foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar, reiterated that Israel wants the freedom to act in southern Lebanon as a part of any ceasefire deal, a position that's clearly a non-starter for Hezbollah. And you could imagine why, right? If you're going to reach a ceasefire, if you're going to reach a truce, if you're going to bring an end to a conflict, then that conflict has to come to an end. And if you're saying that we want to be able to continue to carry out military operations in your territory, then you are saying that you don't want a ceasefire, that you don't want a truce, that you don't want that conflict to come to an end. And so I think this is just another clear example that the U.S. is being undermined by its apparent ally in Israel. Every time they come out with a ceasefire, the Israelis are against it and sabotage it. All right, everybody, that will wrap up the show for today. Again, huge news coming out with the new show, the Kyle Anzalone Show. Very excited about it. I will be dropping links, particularly on my Twitter page this weekend, to the first episode of that show and where you can subscribe for all the future episodes. Hopefully in the coming weeks, next week is busy with Thanksgiving, but hopefully in the coming weeks, I can really nail down the schedule and let you know which days will be conflicts of interest and which days will be the Kyle Anzalone Show. But this is really big, and I think it's a step in the right direction for what I'm doing here. And as the Kyle Anzalone Show really gets its legs underneath it, it's going to be a really, really cool thing. And you all are going to add, if you love this, you're going to love that twice as much, because there's so much more to it. It's so much better quality, better production, and I'm just really excited about it. So everybody, thank you all so much for tuning in. All the support you give me across all my work, and no, it's not just this. You're sharing my articles, you're reading antiwar.com, you're reposting what I put out on ads. And so thank you for all of that and for your future support of the Kyle Anzalone.